Hey, everybody, how are you doing? Middle of the week. Fall break is next week. That's true. I'm off a little bit when I was talking about the midterm being next week. It's actually the week after, but I'll send out an email on that. Okay, so we're going to do chapter 7 on photosynthesis. And frankly, now that we've gone through cellular respiration, photosynthesis shouldn't be as bad because we're doing a lot of the same concepts. We're just going to do it in plants, obviously, instead of in animals, but terms like electron carrier and oxidation and reduction and electron transport chains, all of those things should be familiar by now. So this one usually is less intense than cellular respiration. So let me share my screen here. Go over a couple of things. Okay. So there's a couple of things that you need to know as far as vocabulary for photosynthesis, but you know what, actually, sorry guys, hang on, I'm gonna do my whiteboard first. Just typing. Okay, again, this is caps lock on. Photosynthesis, okay? All right, so I guess we'll just start there. Let's start with the definition for photosynthesis. Okay, so this is the process of light energy transformed into chemical energy. Okay, so when we were dealing with cellular respiration, we had organic sources of fuel, our glucose, right? And then we had oxygen. Photosynthesis doesn't use organic fuel sources, okay? This is what it uses. Switch again. Okay, so this is the formula for photosynthesis. Look familiar? So the equation for photosynthesis is actually the reverse of what it is for cellular respiration, okay? So the reactants here in photosynthesis were actually the products of cellular respiration. And the products of photosynthesis were the reactants for cellular respiration. You can kind of see that this is a nifty little circle of life, if you will, because the things that the plants produce, glucose and oxygen, are things that animals, animal life has to have to do cellular respiration. But then the things that we produce as products of cellular respiration are the things required for plants to do photosynthesis, right? We take in oxygen, but plants require carbon dioxide. Part of what we produce in cellular respiration is water. Plants need water. Obviously not with the water, it's not gonna be the same, you know, as actually watering a plant with a hose, but anyway. So really, if you remember one equation, you remember the other, so just flip them around, okay? All right, so again though, these things are inorganic. Why did I do it like that? Hang on. Yes, there's carbon and carbon dioxide, but this is a gas and it's not considered the same type of organic molecule that you have in glucose. Okay, so in addition to carbon dioxide and water, you also need light energy. And that light energy comes from the sun, okay? Or from sources that can mimic that same type of light, like a greenhouse. Let's go back to text for some more vocabulary. So when it comes to those lights, light energy, those are called photons. So in addition to my other nerd interests, I've always loved Star Trek: The Next Generation. And anybody that's watched Star Trek, even the movies, know that they always talk about arming the photon torpedoes. So that's what photons actually are. They're light energy. Okay. All right, let's do a little bit more vocabulary. This is going to be kind of some of the anatomy of the plant, if you will. Let's talk about chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are light-absorbing organelles. And photosynthetic organisms, mostly that's going to be plants, although there are some protists in the animal, not in the animal kingdom, but in a different kingdom from plants that can do photosynthesis as well, and even some bacteria. But anyway, chloroplasts, light-absorbing organelles, and they have a couple of different structures inside of them that we need to know. First, we have the stroma. This is the jelly-like fluid that's inside. Then we have the thylakoids. I'll show you images of all of these. So you have your chloroplast. It has thylakoids, which I always think about as a single pancake, or actually what I really always think about them is like chewy spree. I don't even know why I always think about them as chewy spree versus the original, but I do. So thylakoids are like a spree candy, and grana is like the roll of the spree candy, okay? If you'll notice, these things have a somewhat similar composition as mitochondria, as mitochondria does in animal cells. That's because their functions are vastly similar. They both are responsible for producing energy in their cells. So just like mitochondria has the matrix, which is the jelly-like fluid, and then the cristae and the outer membrane, chloroplasts also have that jelly-like fluid, only it's called the stroma, with its inner membrane system, the thylakoids, which compile into grana. Okay. Little information about chloroplasts here. It's kind of interesting, kind of put it in perspective. So first off, leaves have the most chloroplasts, not a surprise. There are 300 million so if you were to take a leaf and cut out a section that was the size of a stamp, you'd have roughly 300 million chloroplasts within that. Chloroplasts give the leaf and all green parts of the plant its green coloring. And we'll talk about why that happens in just a minute. I just want to go over a couple of more terms. Okay, so inside chloroplasts are pigment molecules called chlorophyll. These pigment molecules absorb light. They absorb light from the visible spectrum. Okay, there's 3 different types. Actually, there's a lot of different types of chlorophyll, but we're just going to talk about 3 for this class, but there are others. So we're going to talk about chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is going to absorb light on the blue, violet, which is violet, and red ends of the spectrum. I'll show you images so you can kind of see what this means. Chlorophyll B, having issues typing today, this is going to absorb blue and orange. Something called carotenoids. Yes, like carrot. And that's actually because of the color that it's going to show. Carotenoids absorb blue-green light. Okay. All right, let me do one more term. Okay, so these are, you know what, I'm just going to give this one term so it's not all confusing. So stoma or stomata are the opening in leaves that let gas exchange happen, okay? Because it needs carbon dioxide and it produces oxygen. Those gases are swapped or released through stomata. Okay, let me stop sharing this for a minute, and now I can go back over here. Okay. So in this leaf, kind of diagram, there's really not a whole lot you're going to have to remember from this, but I will just show you some of the terms. Okay. So stoma or stomata is this little opening right here. The openings are controlled by something called guard cells, which I'm not going to include. I don't keep those on my notes anymore. I'm not going to include this in your tests, your exams, or quizzes, but I do want you to just know how it works. So they're interesting because when the guard cells swell up with water, they swell closed. So they close out the opening because they swell up and close, swell together. When there's not a lot of water in them, then they withdraw, they pull away, and the opening expands to let gases in and out. So in this way, by determining how much water to take in, these guard cells decide if the stoma is going to be open or closed. This is the big deal because every type of plant kind of does photosynthesis a little bit differently. The process overall is the same, but some do part of photosynthesis during the day and the other parts at night. And so being able to regulate when these stoma are open and closed, when it's allowing out moisture, when it's allowing gas exchange to happen, it's an important part of the preservation of the plant. Anything else? There's really not a whole lot else. I'll point out that leaves have a waxy cuticle, meaning, as you know, if you've ever taken a leaf and you see water on it, the water tends to bead up on the leaf rather than soaking in like a sponge. And that's because of this waxy, hydrophobic coating that's on the outside of the leaf, on both sides. Okay? Let's try it again. All right, so this image here is a dyed or stained image under a microscope showing the very, very, very thin layer at the top where the openings where the stomata are, and then the guard cells are these kind of half-moon shapes on either side. That's what they really look like under a microscope, but again, they've been stained so you can see them better. Okay, so we talked about chloroplasts. All of these individual little green circles, if you will, are chloroplasts, individual chloroplasts within these cells. This actually. If you, oh, you guys are doing 1015 probably from home, aren't you? So you're probably not doing it in the lab, because they used to do a lab in 1015 where you would basically kind of be able to see this. You'd stain a sample of a plant and you could see some of this under a microscope for yourself. But in the meantime, notice here these brick-like kind of structures. These are cell walls. Remember that cell walls are made out of cellulose, which is one of our macromolecules. It's a polysaccharide. It's the most abundant organic compound on Earth because it makes up the stiff parts of plants, if you will. So we have these cell walls which help the plant maintain its structure and also help with the water flow. And then again, all these individual little dots in here are chloroplasts. Okay, a gajillion of them. 300 million approximately, in the size of a postage stamp, as I said. All right, so here we have the structure of a chloroplast. This would be so here's a single chloroplast is what they're showing. They've opened it up. You can see the outer and the inner membranes, and then you can see the thylakoid. Thylakoid would be one of these discs, right? So this is one, this is one, this is one. When you stack those discs together, that's when you end up with grana, this whole stack, okay? That's why I said chewy spree. They look like chewy spree. And then, of course, in between you have the stroma, which is the fluid that's inside. So if we think about the comparison between chloroplasts and mitochondria, I draw a pathetic excuse for mitochondria here. Remember that in mitochondria, these intermembrane twistings are called cristae. I remember that their job was to increase surface area. It did that whole like standing in line at Disneyland thing and how it twists back and forth to maximize surface area. Well, thylakoids and grana do the exact same thing, but instead of maximizing space horizontally like you'd see in mitochondria, it does it vertically, okay? So you can write this down in your notes to help you remember. Because, and again, mitochondria is going to be horizontal, and within chloroplasts, it's going to be vertical. But the function is the same, to provide as much space and as much membrane space as possible to be able to perform photosynthesis, okay, the energy production for plants. Okay. All right. We're going to do a tiny bit of physics. It's not crazy physics, so don't worry. But it's fascinating. I love this part. Let me point out some things. Over here. So when it comes to wavelengths, there are wavelengths that we can see and there's wavelengths that we can't. So for the ones that we can see, it's called part of the visible spectrum, okay? And its location is about here. Actually, I'm going to change this color. Okay. This is what we're able to see with our eyes, unassisted. But it's this tiny portion of the rest of the spectrum where we have everything from these really long, slow wavelengths, which are radio waves and TV waves, to stuff that's really tight and fast, which would be gamma rays and X-rays on that end of the spectrum, okay? Then we have all the stuff in between. Microwaves, like the waves that literally run your microwave ovens, infrared light, UV light, and there's all kinds in between. Some of these other parts of the spectrum, there are special, night vision goggles and things like that that can enhance vision for us at night. that allow us to take in a little bit more of these other spectrums or parts of the spectrum. But for the most part, this is what we see right here, okay? This is also the part that plants are going to use when it comes to photons. Remember that photons, particles of light energy. If I can spell and write, okay? All right, let me talk about something else with color for just a minute. When it comes to color, we see color because it's being reflected, okay? So usually I point out something in the room. I can't point out anything in the room because I'm here by myself. Look at the color shirt you're wearing right now. Whatever color you see is the color that's being reflected back. So like for me, gray is being reflected back, okay? That means that the pigments in my shirt, which are what we call kind of dyes, the pigments in my shirt are absorbing all of the other colors from the spectrum except the ones that make gray, okay? So if you're wearing a red shirt, you see red because those pigments are absorbing everything except red. Red is being reflected back. White reflects all colors of the spectrum, and black absorbs all colors of the spectrum, which is why it's black, okay? Or, yeah. All right, so, did I say that wrong? White reflects them all, and black absorbs, yeah, never mind. Okay, so at any rate, that's where color comes from, or that's where us being able to see color comes from, which is again why plants look green to us, because the plant is absorbing pretty much all the other colors of the spectrum, leaving us only with the green to be viewed. Okay. Sorry, every time it starts to freak out, now I'm like, oh my gosh, please don't be broken again. Okay, so let's look at how plants do that. All right. So this is kind of a look at how plants utilize light in the spectrum for photosynthesis. Remember that we have, well, let me show you what we're looking at first. We're looking at absorption. So you'll notice that here in the purple or the violet and blue sections, absorption is very high. It means plants are absorbing a lot of this color. Similar on the red and orange, very high. It means, again, plants are absorbing a lot of this. What they're not resorbing much of, did I say resorbing? My goodness, I'm having issues. They're not absorbing much of is our kind of green and yellow, okay? So what does this mean? Well, remember we talked about our different chlorophylls? Chlorophyll A, if you recall, is going to do our violet end and the red end, okay? And then we have chlorophyll B, and it's going to do more of this blue end and the orange end. And then the last one that we've talked about are the carotenoids. And the carotenoids are going to do this kind of blue-green area through here, okay? All right, because again, we have so much absorption happening on the violet through blue and the red through orange ends, we're going to see a lot of green reflected. What about fall colors? Fall colors are what we're used to seeing right in here. As the temperature cools down, the leaves start to change color, right? Why is that? Well, that is because most of the other pigments in leaves are sensitive to temperature change, and they don't do real well when the temperature starts to cool down. Okay, so they kind of lose their ability to function. The carotenoids, however, last a little longer in cold temperature. So when the leaves start to change color to more of the oranges and the yellows and eventually to brown, dead, it's because the chlorophyll A, the chlorophyll B, and some of these other pigments are actually dying off. They don't die in the sense that it's actual, the pigments are chemical. The leaf is organic, but the color part are chemical, so they just don't function anymore. And since those aren't functioning, what we're left seeing is everything that the carotenoids are reflecting, which is on this end of the spectrum over here. Okay, so let me try to say it again. In the fall, we see these colors because the chlorophylls have quit functioning and the carotenoids last a little longer in colder weather. The carotenoids are absorbing what we would pick up in the green area, right? Normally that's reflected, but the carotenoids are going to pick it up. So we're going to see the oranges and the yellows and the reds and eventually brown. So when we're looking at fall leaves, we're actually watching the process of those leaves dying. They're beautiful in death, but they're dying, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. This is important because if you'll notice, plants are really good at absorbing and maximizing most of the spectrum, meaning that they can harness energy from photons of light from across the visible spectrum. They're not wasteful. Okay, most organic organisms are not wasteful. The whole point of most of the things that happen on that cellular level are conservation of energy, trying to not waste anything. Okay. I am going to pause this here, and then I'm going to come right back and finish it in a second video so that you have this in segments.